The bottom line, however, is that we are running out of weapons with regard to deterring Vladimir Putin. And this was the big problem. If you don't deter the action, and then the action happens, your tools shrink dramatically. If you've already levied sanctions, and you say to Vladimir Putin, listen, let's say we had canceled Nord Stream 2. Let's say we had never greenlit Nord Stream 2 before this. And we had said to Putin, if you don't invade, then we'd be happy to discuss the opening of Nord Stream 2. That seems like more of a carrot. If we had canceled Nord Stream 2, and we said, listen, we're hearing rumors you're going to go into Ukraine. You give us a guarantee you're not going into Ukraine? We're happy to remove the sanctions. We'll go back to status quo ante. Perhaps Putin doesn't go into Ukraine. We'd spent not the last 30 years steadfastly ignoring predations by the Chinese in Hong Kong and ignoring predations by the Russians in Georgia and Crimea. If we had not done that, perhaps Vladimir Putin wouldn't have been convinced, as he apparently was, that the world was a paper tiger and would do nothing in the face of a Russian advance. Now that he has gone in, the tools radically shrink. Because what can you do to him that you haven't already done? Not all that much. Basically, we're already doing it. We've levied these major economic sanctions. We have rearmed the opposition in Ukraine the best that we can. And so the West's options are shrinking and shrinking fast, as the Wall Street Journal points out today. They say 7 days into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. and its North Atlantic Treaty Organization allies are coming under increasing pressure to do more to help Ukraine, even as they face diminishing options for doing so. As Russia continues to push it to capture urban areas, one of the more drastic options discussed publicly has been a no-fly zone that would stop Russian aircraft from launching strikes over Ukraine. The idea has been dismissed by the United States and NATO countries. The reason being, we don't want to be in a direct conflict with the Russians. Not because we wouldn't win, we would. I mean, we would shoot down all of their jets in a matter of moments. We have much more sophisticated military. I mean, the Ukrainians are shooting down Russian jets right now, and they have Soviet-era weaponry. The United States, if NATO got directly involved in this conflict, and there were no fears of broader conflict or tactical nuclear warheads, this conflict would be over already. Russia does not have anything like the military power in the conventional sense necessary to stop NATO or the United States, for example. But that's not really the question. The question is bleed over. The question is, does Russia then start attacking actual NATO states? Does it start launching those tactical nuclear weapons? That really is the question. And that's what Putin was saying, right? When Putin raised the nuclear alert, what he's saying is, do not do a no-fly zone, because if you do, you're just going to push me further, and you've already seen how far I'm willing to go. Creating a continuous, effective no-fly zone over Ukraine, particularly with several NATO nations, would require several hundred planes not only to uphold the no-fly zone, but to support those aircraft maintaining that no-fly zone. In addition, Air Force across multiple nations would have to coordinate, and should Russia attack NATO member aircraft, that would be seen as an attack on the 30-member alliance, and at that point, you do have a world war. The British government has said it would instead continue to impose more sanctions. Sanctions, however, are not having an immediate impact on the battlefield, as Western leaders have acknowledged. Officials hope that the unprecedented economic hit will bite the Russian economy rapidly, meaning that as the bombs fall on Kyiv, there will be Russian bank runs and Russian businesses collapsing, showing real-world consequences for Putin. But that's going to mean, basically, there are only a few scenarios here left on the table. Scenario number one is that the Russian oligarchs take a look at Putin. They say, you're destroying our livelihoods, you've destroyed our holdings, you're getting Russian soldiers killed, you need to go. And the Russian military turns on Putin and they oust him. That is the wild hope. That is hope number one. It's never worked anywhere else, but that is sort of the hope here. Okay, so good luck with that. Then there is situation number two, and that is a large-scale guerrilla war that carries on the continent for 10 to 20 years, according to intelligence sources, in which Russia uses the overwhelming bulk of its force to take Ukraine, installs a puppet dictator, and then the Ukrainian people just resist for the next couple of decades with help from the West. Very, very ugly canker growing in the middle of Europe with extraordinary repercussions for the border states around Ukraine already. 1 million refugees have been swamping the border. Hundreds of thousands of them have been moving into Poland. Whenever you have a major international crisis like this, whether it is in Libya or whether it is in Ukraine, and Ukraine's a lot closer than Libya, you end up with a situation with huge refugee issues and massive overflow into the West, which creates significant domestic problems for Western European countries at the very, very least. Plus, an emboldened Russian state, which has taken it and really has no reason not to try and break the NATO alliance even further. And then there's scenario number three. Scenario number three is an off-ramp. And this is kind of what everybody is looking for at this point, except for maybe Putin. So while we talk about how we have the whip hand over Putin, that really isn't true. Putin has the whip hand because whoever has the least to lose is the person who is also least likely to come to the table. And at this point, what exactly does Putin have to lose? They took the economic hit. They're going to continue to take the economic hit. Vladimir Putin doesn't care about the economic hit. If he feels that he can maintain his position at the head of the Russian thugocracy only by winning the war in Ukraine, why would he stop? Why would he stop? What concessions could the West make that would dissuade him? And it's unclear at this point what concessions would look like in that case. So you have to hope for scenario number 1 and number 3, but it looks like the most realistic scenario is scenario number 2. You can see that the Biden administration is pushing for scenario number 3. John Kirby over at the Pentagon, he says, we'd like to see Moscow take the temperature down about the nukes. Yeah, I'm sure we would. I mean, yes, we would like to see all the temperatures decreased at this point.
We'd certainly like to see Moscow reciprocate by taking the temperature down on rhetoric about nuclear posture. We certainly would like to see him de-escalate by coming to a ceasefire and de-escalating and moving those forces back home and getting out of Ukraine.
Okay, so he is correct about this. And the Biden administration, again, the mistakes that the Biden administration made were mistakes that were made before the invasion. What the Biden administration has done since the invasion is the correct thing. And that's not because they somehow rallied the world or because Joe Biden is a great politician. It's because this is what happens in politics. A thing happens, everybody reacts to the thing. That is what has happened in Eastern Europe right now. According to Secretary of State Tony Blinken, the United States is monitoring the shelling of civilians. He says that the Russians have really ratcheted things up in the last couple of days.
We've certainly seen in the past that one of Russia's methods of war is to be absolutely brutal in trying to cow the citizenry of a given country. And that includes, at the very least, indiscriminate targeting and potentially deliberate targeting as well. We're looking very closely at what's happening in Ukraine right now, including what's happening to civilians. We're taking account of it, we're documenting it, and we want to ensure, among other things, that there's accountability for it.
What sort of accountability, though? The problem is weakness breeds weakness. If you didn't stop it before it started, it's very difficult to start it now, which is why Joe Biden correctly was saying yesterday that while it's clear that Russia is targeting civilians, he's not sure if it's war crimes yet. The reason that Biden is saying that is not, he knows it's war crimes. When I say he's correct, what I mean is that Joe Biden is looking for that off-ramp. He's desperately looking for Vladimir Putin to take that off-ramp, which is what the West has to hope for at this point, because if Putin doesn't, then you're going to end up with scenario number 2, which is that large-scale, long-lasting occupation of a country that does not want to be occupied, dead center of Europe. Here is Joe Biden trying to take down the rhetoric.
Russia is committing war crimes. Ukraine.
We are following it very closely. It's early to say that.
Russia is intentionally targeting civilian areas. There are over 2,000 civilians.
There they are.
Okay, so again, he's admitting that they're doing it, but at the same time, he won't say they're doing it. This would be all well and good and sort of the sort of normal way this would proceed, per se. I mean, there's no normal here, but this is sort of the understandable way in which this would proceed, except for the fact that this administration continues to be very, very unserious about Russia with regard to ancillary issues. So if you're seeking to dissuade Russia from doing what it is doing, you do need to cut off relations with them. You do need to stop attempting to work with them on issues supposedly important to them. And you actually do need to call on the American people to make a sacrifice. Now, Joe Biden said in the State of the Union that you will have to make a sacrifice. Then he wouldn't actually detail what the sacrifice was, because here's the problem for Joe Biden. In the sense that weakness breeds submission, and so Joe Biden's weakness brought about this conflict. They pull out from Afghanistan, emboldened Putin. Several months of us saying that NATO alliances were split and that a minor incursion might not merit any sort of response, that all of that encouraged Putin's invasion. That means that he has now brought this about. And so now he's trying to split the baby. Because instead of saying, listen, we have to bring the harshest sanctions we possibly can, that might mean higher prices at the pump. And we are also going to have to tell the left, we're going to have to tell people on the progressive left that we are going to put our environmental policies on hold because we need to compete with Russia. We need to compete with China. We need to be energy independent. That is a national security issue. Instead of Joe Biden saying that to his left, and instead of saying to everybody else, and that means that temporarily your gas prices are going to go up, but this is what it means to be the leader of the free world. Instead of Joe Biden saying any of that, they just refuse to say any of that. So Jen Psaki said yesterday that we are thinking about energy sanctions, but we're still importing 600,000 barrels of Russian oil every day because, after all, we have to minimize the price impact on Americans. So he's a coward. Because if you're going to be a leader, that means you sometimes have to say things you know will be unpopular to the American people. Joe Biden isn't willing to do that. The battle for the culture is heating up. We here at the Daily Wire are making some big moves. So be sure to like, subscribe, ring that bell, because you're not going to want to miss a single moment.